Well, I think we probably ought to go ahead and get started. And I will introduce our speaker today. And welcome to everybody to the second of our Brown Bag series that'll take us through the month of September, celebrating Women 2020. And if you haven't been into the gallery yet, please stop in. We've got a tremendous, I'm seeing that my internet connection is unstable, so I'll talk faster. Um, I hope you'll stop into the gallery and see the exhibit live, but we also have a lot of it available online. And if you check out our not our Facebook, our webpage piece that Roseanne Shansky and Dorothy Gill did back in the 70s, and it's in its entirety on our website if you want to see, and it's the history of Anna Howard Shaw.
It's actually on Facebook.
Today, we're, what?
It's actually on Facebook.
It was on Facebook?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so we've got 4 very different kinds of topics over the next couple of weeks, all related to women and women in 2020. And today we have Tina Arduini, who is a professor in our English department, and she has her doctorate in rhetoric and composition, and went to a marvelous institution for her degree. I happen to be the same one I did. And she's going to talk to us about the challenges of motherhood in this virtual age. And she is an expert in that also because she has 2 adorable children that I haven't had a chance to hug in a very long time. So Tina, I'll let you take it away.
Oh, thanks, Roxanne. So my interest in researching, I do a lot of digital rhetorics researching. And so something I've been looking at over the past, probably about 2 years, since my son was born in 2017, is how motherhood is portrayed in online spaces, and specifically researching social media and how people use that to kind of do the mothering thing in the modern era. I was looking more specifically at academic mothers, since that's where I'm at in my career in life right now. But for this presentation, I kind of broadened that a little bit more to looking at all mothers in modern times through the digital age. So I have some slides I wanted to share with some statistics and some quotes from women in those spaces to kind of start the discussion. And then I thought if people wanted, they could share their own experiences with modern motherhood, whether it's digital or non-digital. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's start this up. Okay, so obviously I was playing on, the it takes a village mantra that people talk about when, it comes to raising children, except now I think it takes a digital village because people go online in modern parenting to get that same support that they may have only gotten from their local, either friends and family. And now people are moving into that online space. So I thought I'd start by first looking at like a brief timeline, so to kind of see where this whole discussion is even, like why it's even important in today's age. And I started with post-World War II because I think that's where motherhood started becoming more really kind of defined more differently. And that's, considering the fact that women were in the workplace for the first time during the war, and then after the war, they were first forced back into domesticity. And so for some women, that wasn't where they wanted to be. And so that kind of started this whole idea of, what makes a mother? Can moms work outside of the home, and what happens when they do? And so post-World War II, and then the 1960s and 70s, that's where we have the rise of women being prescribed opiates and narcotics in order to deal with, the anxiety they may have been having after being forced back into that domestic role, if that wasn't a role that they wanted. So once their choice was taken away, people were struggling with that. And so, the mother's little helper, all those, day drinking things that people talk about in the 60s and 70s based off of, not being given that choice. In 1974, that's where the first known use of supermom, and that's, the one word supermom, came into play. For those of you not familiar with the term, a supermom is kind of supposed to be like this superhero mom who does it all. She's a stay-at-home mom, but she also works outside of the home, but she does all the cooking and the cleaning. She essentially loses her entire identity to her mother's side, so that the only thing she is a mother, even when she's outside of the home. And so that's first known use again is in 1974, but it didn't really become too popular until the 1990s and 2000s. And that's when there was this added pressure to be a supermom. If you weren't being a supermom, the one word supermom, then you weren't being a good mom at all. And that's where kind of that thing happens. I think we see it a lot in like movies and television shows of that era. And then in like magazines, parenting magazines, trying to tell women how they can have it all, happening during that era as well. And then in the 2000s, up to about 2010, that's where we see the rise of mommy blogs. Those are, online spaces where women were going to start sharing their experiences as mothers. They still go on today, but the height of them was about 2010. And here's where women are starting to kind of push back about that idea of being, we need to be a supermom. And so women started sharing their stories. Sometimes it was a stay-at-home mom sharing like tips on what to do with your kids during the day. Sometimes it was a working mom talking about her struggles. They came in really all shapes and sizes, but we really saw the height of those in 2010. And now I think that led essentially to the modern critiques of that supermom one word versus the now supermom differentiation of the 2010s up to 2020. And now people are starting to see that, you don't need to be the superhero mom and still be a good mom. You can be a good mom in other ways. And so I wanted to kind of share some statistics then about the expectations of mothers. And so the University of Michigan does a monthly poll through their CS Mott Children's Hospital. And in 2017, one of their polls was on mom shaming. And so they polled a national poll where they asked women, have you been criticized about your parenting choices? And so 61% of moms in 2017 that took this poll said yes, they have. And then you can see hopefully the infographic on the side here. These are the people who are offering the most criticism. And so the mom's own parents kind of topped the charts. On the 37% were criticized by their own parents that they're not doing a good enough job raising their kids. And then the child's other parents slightly behind on 36. So the dad, or if it was a two female household, the other mom would have been criticizing them. Then by in-laws. And then less so, other moms in public. This was looking specifically at, out and about public, not digital space public, only 12%. And then their friends were also criticizing them. So mom were getting, criticized by a lot of different people on their own parenting styles. And I thought that'd be useful to compare that to how dads are being criticized. So luckily, the Children's Hospital, they did a poll in 2019 on dad shaming. The poll was slightly different. So the mom poll was on kids ages 0 to 5, and there tends to be a little more criticism on how women are handling, raising babies in those early developmental ages. But the poll still had some other parallel things between them. And so you can see the difference. So 61% of moms in 2017, and then 52% of dads being criticized about their parenting choices in the 2019 poll. The major differences are that the child's other parents, so in most cases the mother would be criticizing the dad's choices. They didn't differentiate between in-laws and their own parents. It was just grandparents criticizing them, still significantly less than the in-laws or the mom's own parents at only 24%. And then other moms or other dads in public. Now their public included online spaces, so a slightly different statistic. And then their friends, it would have been only 9%. So I still wanted to point out, dads are being shamed because I think that is part of the parenting role, but it still is, noticeably different. 10% less is a significant difference, I think, between, dads being criticized and moms being criticized. Something that the poll didn't register was the praise that people get for parenting. More often men are praised for doing trivial things like taking their kids to the grocery store. I've read quite a few, dad blogs about this process, how they go to the grocery store and they're praised for being an amazing dad when all they did was go to the store, pick up food and come home, which is a task that mothers do all the time without getting thanked. So the bigger discrepancy, I think, is on praise as opposed to criticism. But the polls tend to not look at those kinds of statistics. And so the parts of the unsolicited advice, how that affects women and parents in general, with part of that same poll, they talked about, how does this affect how you treat yourself and your family? And so based off of that criticism, in general, parents feel less confident in their parenting choices and parenting styles, which makes them want to participate less in parenting. It also makes them avoid people who criticize. So maybe avoiding family members, friends who are offering that criticism, online spaces where that may happen. Or they also avoid places where those criticisms happen. So sometimes they stop going to certain parks, they stop going to church, maybe they stop going to different other like outdoor public spaces. And I think we can see how that easily leads to women feeling isolated, which then can kind of add to their anxiety. And so what I wanted to then build off of that is the idea of motherhood on social media and how they are now taking that control back. So all this criticism is happening. I think we can really see on social media how women are starting to take that control over their lives. So maybe, you know, they're starting to feel isolated. They're trying to find a community elsewhere where they're not going to get that criticism. And so I did a quick sampling of online memes that I've seen about motherhood recently, and women are starting to praise each other for the work that they do as moms. If you've been on social media recently, I'm sure you've seen something that's like, what kind of mom, talking about, you know, sending their kids back to school since it's that back to school time. What kind of mom, you know, sends their kids back to school, tries online learning, or tries to continue homeschooling, and it's all, you know, it's a good mom. So it's talking about, you know, whatever choices you make, as long as you're caring about your kids, that makes you a good mom. So that criticism is kind of being pushed to the wayside in hopes of supporting each other. And there's all sorts of other ones, you know, good moms have sticky floors, messy kitchens, laundry piles, dirty ovens, and happy kids. So the idea that good moms are raising happy children, that's more the goal. It's not that, you know, did you breastfeed, or did you, you know, use time out, or, and all those things are kind of being pushed out of the way so that women can start supporting each other. And that's what's been happening in these social media spaces. So there's two other things I wanted to address about motherhood in the digital age. The first is the mommy blogs and how they've been used and are being used to do different things for mothers online. First, they offer a connection to a community. So if we think about, you know, women kind of isolating themselves because they get all this criticism out there, and now they're feeling alone, which makes them have more anxiety. Mommy blogs were a place for women to kind of start that community building. And so I have a quote from one of the more popular mommy blogs, Baby Boy Bakery. And she says, "I decided to start a blog in hopes of making other mom friends to connect with and use as a creative outlet. Motherhood, albeit the best thing in the world, it can also feel very daunting at times, make you feel so lonely." And so this is a place in the mommy blogs, they always have a place for commenting at the bottom. And so women are being able to communicate with each other. So the writers of the blogs start these discussions, and then women can go in and have more lengthy discussions and building that community, which then leads to how they can also build a sense of camaraderie. So the blogger at Yarn Harlot, she talks about, you know, the mother police. If you're a mother, I'm sure you have your own mother police. They never take a day off and have unreasonably high expectations. And so for her, the mother police was this internal dialogue of, you know, all this criticism they're getting that you're not doing a good enough job. So she had a whole long list of things that, you know, good mothers don't mind when somebody throws up. They happily clean up after their children and follow them around. And all these things that moms are supposed to do and be happy about doing, they're not allowed to feel beyond, you know, the needs of their own children. And then she talks about, you know, well, maybe it makes me a bad mother, but I'm calling bullshit on the mother police. And so her blog is about, you know, saying that moms, that supportive nature, that moms do these other things and they can have their identity beyond that, and that offering camaraderie for the people who go to her blog. And so those are kind of the main things that are happening on the mommy blogs. The thing that I've researched the most is social media groups and how those can help create this kind of community for women outside of that criticism that's been happening. So my research is somewhat primary because I'm in 3 different parenting groups, one for academic mothers. So if you see the AM in the response, that's short for academic mothers. I'm also in a parenting group for babies born in 2017, which is very small, you know, so everyone's kind of, their children are going through the same milestones, so people sharing their support. And then I'm in another group about humanist parenting and how to raise children, offering like scientific evidence for things that are happening around them. And so I asked, I polled my social media groups and asked them why they are in these motherhood and parenting groups. And the main thing they talked about was how it offers them the support that they didn't have. And so the academic mamas, so in academia, most women are displaced from their childhood homes. And so they have this isolation that happens to them. So this was a place where they could have that support. The Academic Mamas group, the main group, has over 10,000 members, probably getting close to 15,000, maybe 20,000 by now. And it's where women from all over the world, actually, because there's international members as well, are talking about their experiences and what it's like to be in this world where they're displaced from their family and now they have children and they're not sure how to handle certain things. So you can see some of the comments here. People are generally supportive, and you can post about work or babies without feeling ashamed about either, because other support groups or other social media groups may not offer them that outlet. Another woman talks about she became pregnant with twins and she wanted all the support she could get. And so she's found it through this 2017 academic mamas group. And other people, I wanted support from like-minded people. And so she wanted to make sure that the support she was getting was from other women going through similar ideas. And then seeking advice. So another place people go to find advice is social media, because they want that advice from other moms. And so in these social media groups, one woman talked about, how someone just happened to mention the tongue tie as a possible explanation for a speech delay in toddlers. And it was something she was afraid to ask, but people just happened to bring it up in the group. And so she was able to get advice on that. How to explain death without bringing in religion, how to, parent in academia, because people don't offer the same advice as they might to their, sisters or neighbors if they're, from a different town. And then just it's nice to be around people with similar beliefs. And so those are the things that people are using these social media groups for as a way to potentially reclaim that role of motherhood. And so then the last thing I wanted to mention before opening up for discussion, or, if everyone wants to share their own experiences with it, the digital age of parenting, I think, allows women to reclaim the power that they may have lost. So if we think back to pre-internet era, pre-social media era, parenting advice was very family-centric. Mothers passed it on to daughters, who then passed it on to their own family members, and on and on. And so people would seek their advice from grandmothers, great-grandmothers. That's how it tends to travel down the line. And so it was all still very female-centric. I can see this in my own, my mother-in-law, who would defer to her mother for advice, and now my sister-in-law defers to her mom for advice as well. But I can also start to see the crossover, because my sister-in-law is roughly the same age as me, and she also uses social media. So she's kind of like the hybrid between the two, where she's seeking advice from her mother and grandmother, but now she's also building into this new era of digital age advice. However, before that happened, we had this kind of top-down advice that was happening, probably in the 80s. Up until the 90s and 2000s, parenting books became very popular. So we have this kind of hierarchy of, this is what you should do if you're a mom, and if you're not doing this, something's wrong with you. And so that kind of stole power away from women during that more print-based parenting advice. So we had this collective of women sharing advice. All of a sudden it's taken away from them as these parenting books come in. And so everyone started being criticized for not following the advice that, these books were saying you're supposed to do. And then that leads into the co-created advice that we have now. So parenting advice is shared through, people call it the mamasphere. That's the mommy blogs, the parenting forums, social media groups. It's all collectively known as the mamasphere. And so now we have this mother-to-mother sharing of ideas, where people co-create the advice, and they say, I had that experience too. Here's what I did. And then it goes back and forth. So that power of, their role of motherhood and what you should be doing is now everyone is participating, as opposed to just listening to experts or just passing it down through a trickle effect, which I think is more powerful for women. They don't have to just listen. Now they can participate, ask questions, and be part of that process. So those are the kind of points I thought would be the most useful to bring up, and just to kind of start a discussion. So I want to see if anyone had any questions, or if you wanted to share your own experiences with these kinds of things. So I'll stop talking for a little bit to see if anyone wants to share anything. Nice. I'm popping onto the chat too to see what people are talking about.
I was asking Deirdre if she was going to share all of her experiences about being a bad mom.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, I mean, for Tina, and if people are feeling less isolated because they have the social media and the blogs and all of that, is there also isolation in that still, because it's still through technology, and so they're not having like the physical interactions? Because this is something, especially with the pandemic, we've been talking about, right? Is
Right.
We are still all really connected, but there's still a lot of isolation in that. And as someone who lost her mother at 23, like I went through all of the pregnancy and parenting things, and my kids were born in the 2000s. I definitely bought the parenting books. I had a few women in my life who I could talk to. But as an academic, I also was surrounded by a lot of women who did not choose to have children. So it was, still, I guess I was relying more on books and just like intuition. And so I was just thinking, yeah, it would be cool to have all the social media resources now that I didn't personally have. It wasn't as much of a thing then. But I think there must still be a sense of isolation and not gathering with people.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably at least a level of that, because I know people have been talking about that kind of phantom social interactions that Zoom offers, because you're not really face to face with people. It's, it's not exactly the same, but I think it's better than the alternative. So people are kind of happy with that. Because I know like social media, the Facebook groups have really increased in popularity over the past, 5 months of, I don't know where we're at. So however, since quarantine started back in March, so those groups have increased and people are going to social media a lot more. And I think it's offering the support. I know when I have, in the middle of the night, if one of the kids wake up, if I don't know why, especially when my son was really young, I would just go onto social media and post like, what are you doing? I can't sleep. And women were up at 2, 4 in the morning, jumping on social media and talking to me. And it gave me a sense of, oh, there are people out there going through the same thing. So at least from a personal experience, I feel like it is useful. I wasn't a mom before social media happened, so I don't have anything to compare it to.
Are dads using social media as much? I mean, you did talk a little bit about it, but do you think that they are also doing that? Or can you share?
You say dads?
Yeah, are dads using that as much? Because it seems like, my
Yeah.
guess would be that they're not using it quite as much as moms.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment. So I'm in 2 of the parenting groups I'm in are for mothers. It's specifically moms in whatever niche thing it is. The one of them is for parents, but it's still, I'd say, at least 80% women. So I think I'm sure I know there's Facebook groups and other social media outlets out there where it's like, stay-at-home dads or single dads that are like these little niche groups. But they're definitely not using it as much as women. And I'm not sure why that is. I think men don't have quite the same amount of support in parenting that women do, because they're not expected to parent as much.
Well, I also wonder too, I think women are more apt to connect. And so they
Right.
have, it almost feels innate, like a part of what they do, whereas men don't. I mean, I'm at the other end of all of this. And so what I hear my friends talk about is their spouses they're retired and they're depending on the woman for all of the connections, and the men don't have those same. So it probably is a lifelong or a character, I would call it, flaw in the male world around that. And it probably is perceived as a weakness, maybe, if they have to ask for advice or, that.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely the stigma where if you ask for advice, then you're somewhat less of a man for some reason.
Yeah. Well, interesting to me is, when I think about that, what I'm hearing from you is a desire to connect. And we used to do that through our family relationships, but my daughter didn't have children. She has stepchildren, and my son has 2 children, but my son, his wife never has come to me for any advice in any way whatsoever. And probably like doesn't want it, kind of thing. And I don't know if she perceives it that way at all, no idea, but certainly, and she has her own blog. So, but so that, that idea, it would be lovely to be asked my opinion, I think, as a mom, I would, but that hasn't been my personal experience with sharing information or asking for information. So.
Yeah, I think that is pretty indicative of the era that we're in. So it used to be that's women did go to other women for advice, and now more and more it's that, there's other voices that are more similar to theirs, and so they pick those voices instead that allow them to share that information.
Well, and I even think there's an idea that, like there's things like tummy time now, or, in the crib you can't put blankets or toys, and those were the things that we did. And so we don't So clearly we don't know how to raise children because we did all of those wrong things, you know, and it's amazing that our children would even have survived. So, yeah.
I'm impressed, Lynn, that you didn't give advice to your daughter-in-law when she didn't ask for it, because I'm not sure I could say that about my mother-in-law. Now, my kids are older than your grands, so, maybe it is sort of I don't know how much younger I am than Nick and Melissa, but how much older I am than Nick and Melissa, at least 10 years. So is that a generational thing, I wonder, of grandparents, or is it just a personality?
Good question. I don't know, but yeah, it's interesting to see all of the information that is on social media to share with each other. To me, sometimes I think that would be a little overwhelming, but sometimes I do value more personal experiences that people have versus experts anyway. So I think it's a great resource, but then also right now with what's going on in the world, it's a crazy maker for me.
Yeah.
For me. Others may not feel that way.
Yeah, I think, when Deirdre mentioned earlier, I think, I still feel that lack of actual, like, being face to face with my mom and my sisters and my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, because we've been strictly following quarantine. So we've been here and all of our families back in Pennsylvania. And so I do miss that advice that normally you don't even think to ask it for. So you're sitting around the table and the kids are playing and your mom just does something for you. You can't get that in social media. There's none of that, like, actual interaction that happens. So there is still pieces missing. But for me, it's been a useful tool. Otherwise, I'd feel completely isolated and alone. So there's a give and take, I think, that happens from that place.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there is, like, so I posed a question. I asked, why are you using, this social media group? And I had, I think one of my groups, 50 people responded, and I didn't even know how to sort through all of those. I read them all and tried to figure out, like, which ones were the more indicative. So yeah, there's a lot of, you ask one question and sometimes you get hundreds of responses of advice, and then that's hard to weed through as well.
Well, and you don't even have to ask a question anymore and people want to give their opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
I have a niece who's got a 19-month-old, and I was amazed that she knows everything through Google and through all of her online groups, etc. And he's been a very good baby, but when he was younger, and one night when he was she couldn't do anything for him, he was screaming and screaming. So she calls me from England all the way here to talk to somebody to get advice or comfort or whatever it was. So, that felt good to me, but otherwise everything comes out of the computer. Because she also doesn't have a mother. So, that's her nearest then connection. So.
Well, and I think there is something about that, to both of your points about comfort, right? And connections and hearing somebody who loves you, somebody who really cares about you. Yeah. That there's such value just in that
connection.
Not what you say, but that you answered the phone and you were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So this is Jody. One of my sons was born in '94, so we lived out of state when he was born, and there was another girl that I work with that was pregnant at the same time. And when I was pregnant, I was just like, okay, I'm going to have this baby and, going to go to daycare, do all this stuff. But she was like, hey, you want to go to these parenting classes? And I'm like, why do I need to go to parenting classes? And I realized that she was raised in a family that to me would have been dysfunctional. Just her mother wasn't there for her. They had the nannies and things like that. So she didn't really get to see what it was really like to be a mother. So she would read all the books and go to parenting classes. And to me, that was odd at the time. But now that I think about it, it's like, yeah, she needed something because she didn't have any role models in her life. And I think that's probably what the online forums are assisting with as well, is those people that didn't really have any role models and they need advice and they can turn to the online.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, when I was pregnant, I didn't do those classes either. And I started, one of my friends did, because she was pregnant slightly after me, and so there was a little bit of judgment that I wasn't doing those things, but I felt like I'm gonna learn it on the fly. You know, that's to me, that's what mothering was. I modeled it after what my mom had done. And so I think those parenting classes, I wonder if they're even related to that idea that, you know, that idea of criticism. So moms have been criticized, you know, you're not doing it right. So go to this class so you can learn how to do it right. And so I'm wondering if those most likely would have like come into popularity after those books started being produced. Like, this is how you should be a parent. If you're not doing it this way, something's wrong.
I was kind of struck by one of the first slides you put up there that about Valium, Mommy's Little Helper.
Mm.
And I don't know how other people felt about that. You know, it was a shocker almost, but I knew it happened. And I don't think offended is the right word, but I'm feeling almost outrage that, and I think it still happens, you know, that we drug things away, right, and that women are the recipients of that often. You know, or put them in the mental institute, right?
I was going to share something about that. I just learned last week from somebody who used to work in mental health that frequently women that come in with drug addiction are misdiagnosed with something like bipolar disorder, unlike men who come in and they say, yes, it's the drug addiction. But with women, they connect it to some sort of emotional mental health issue as in addition to the drug issue. And I thought that was really startling, and it made me think about, you know, at one time their disappointment with what they didn't have access to in life was treat them with drugs, and now it's if they have a drug addiction, then they're mentally ill. So I just thought that was a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, it also makes me think of like postpartum depression has gone undiagnosed for decades, and just recently people are starting to see that this is an actual thing that happens to women right after they give birth. And still it's more so diagnosed with medicine than like mental health strategies. And going back to the idea that, you know, women should be drugged as opposed to listened to, because it's easier to prescribe something than to actually see that there's a problem and talk about it. And I think that's still certainly happening. You know, what decades after? So 64 was when the Mommy's Little Helper was out. Now it's, I can't do the math quickly, 60 years later.
Now we have a bottle of wine. Actually, I think it'd make a good label, wouldn't it?
I think the wine thing is an interesting thing to bring up because there's all this focus on, you know, women groups and drinking wine. It's like a thing, right? Women get together and they drink wine, and this is how they cope with their lives. And hey, yeah, like I enjoy my wine, but there's a gendered thing that's going on, and there's movies being made about like, hey, this is what women do.
So is it increasing the number of women who are choosing to drink wine now? Is it adding to an addiction problem?
It's interesting to think about. What's the show? It's Magnolia's, not Steel Magnolias, Magnolia something or other that's on Netflix. Sweet Magnolias. Yeah. And every episode ends with them drinking margaritas and eating chips and salsa. And this is what they do. They get together. You know, I mean, it's about their relationships in this small town, but it always ends with them with a pitcher of margaritas and chips and salsa and saying something about the latest love interest and work stuff.
Yeah. Well, Kathy and Hoda, whatever that show was, which was a morning show, always, yeah. I mean, they usually would have like a glass of wine sitting in front of them, you know, and so maybe it's not the imaging that we really want, you know, for sure, you know, have fun. I get that. I'm in the middle of that all the time, but maybe we've gone to the other side with how we're coping. What about being in a kayak? You know what I mean? Or, you know, walking in nature or something like that. Maybe we need to sort of think about changing that imaging.
Well, I do
Well,
think
and
about that. Oh, I'm sorry, Roxanne. I was just going to say, I do think about that with folks that are, recovering alcoholics. Then does that make them feel like they don't have a space because without the alcohol, then they can't join with other women.
Well, and I have a close friend that's an issue for her, and she's young, and she just doesn't feel like she fits because everybody, when they're gathering, it's around drinking. And so I have encouraged her to sort of create a new space, invite the same people, but go walking, go whatever it might be without the drinking part of it. So it can be exclusive for sure.
well, all I was going to mention was when we were talking about, the phenomenon of Mother's Little Helper and drugging everything, we never, when years ago, we didn't have advertisements to, hey, you should take this prescription drug, go ask your doctor for it.
Mm.
That's just weird.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's like we can just take a drug, hey, you think you're feeling low, take this drug, this will make you feel better, and it's just like we want to drug everything. We want it to just be an easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially back then, there were a lot more physicians who were men and didn't really want to necessarily listen to listen, number one, and to hear all of the emotion. And this was a great way of sorting the problem out from their point of view.
Well, and that's exactly what my friend brought up. It was the emotionality of the women that come in for this treatment that ends up leading to these diagnoses in their case, whereas the men don't bring the same degree of emotion when they're discussing what's going on with their addictions, and that's why it doesn't lead to borderline personality or bipolar disorder diagnoses, because it's the emotions that they're looking at, and that makes it's the emotion that makes them uncomfortable.
Lots of food for thought, right?
Oh yeah.
Anybody have any other comments or questions for Tina? It was a really nice presentation, Tina. I mean, a lot of thoughtful food for thought there.
Thanks.
And you
definitely
didn't say anything about the people who don't have children give the best advice on parenting. We always know
Without a
the
doubt.
most about it.
I was just going to add that, it's my personal belief that until men advance in these ways, right, women don't get out of boxes. It's always, it's relational, right? So fathers don't have support systems, and if fathers aren't encouraged to be equal caregivers and all of that, then that's why we have super moms. I think women cut a deal. They wanted to go back into the workplace, and what was expected at home was that nothing changed. So their deal was, okay, I will do everything.
Yeah.
But of course, after doing everything for a few decades, they were like, this is insane. I'm working too. You need to do something also. Do something. And one of the huge complaints that I still hear from women is that they do the majority of the work in the house while they work and their husbands work, but then they come home and the husband doesn't do half of the work at home. And so this is, I think until there's kind of a revolution there, this will still be a problem for women.
Absolutely. I know. So for those of you who don't know me, my husband's a stay-at-home dad, and that sector of men has steadily increased over the past probably like 5 or 10 years. I don't know about 10 years, but at least within the last 5 years, because he was quite the enigma when he was first a stay-at-home dad, and people looked at him very oddly. And we thought that it was more common because I don't know, from watching TV shows and movies, there was a lot of stay-at-home dads, but in practice and in real life, it doesn't really happen. And so, yeah, I think once maybe that population gets bigger and men are seen as caretakers, then they'll feel more like, this is a place for me to be and I can be fulfilled. I think men aren't encouraged to be fulfilled through childcare, and that really hurts. It hurts the whole family. It hurts the dynamic. It hurts, the moms who have to pick up the slack. Absolutely.
When you wonder, Mr. Mom, do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
So instead of dad, it's Mr. Mom. You know, it's still that's the person that's really supposed to be doing the work, is the mom, or being the, yeah.
Yeah, I just had a colleague at another institution talk about how there's somebody there who actually mocks. There's a woman who works there whose husband's stay at home, and he makes comments about her because her husband's at home. Like, and I forget the word that it was used, but it was something like that. Like she's, I don't know, there was some phrase like a Mr. Mom type phrase that was being applied that I can't remember. But I think we need more images of men involved in the media. I don't think there's enough. I think we still see more of like the Mr. Mom type of stuff still, and attitudes towards stay-at-home dads and active dads and those roles. We need more of that so that men are, it's more normalized, right?
Well, we still, even women will say, I need a wife.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, I'm like, well, our language is interesting, I think. How or I'd rather raise 10 boys than 2 girls. But back to that whole idea of emotion, you know, with the boys, and I have one of each, but you get more flatline, you know, like, and with the girl, you get the whole spectrum. And most people don't like the other end of the spectrum with their daughters, you know, and so they say things like, I'd rather raise, and women say this, and it just strikes me as so insulting to women in general to say things like that. So I think our whole language needs some reframing and new imaging, even to, you know, still.
I agree. Absolutely. It's like the boys will be boys comment. It's like, what are you saying? You can't parent them? You can't teach them how to be men? Right?
Maybe that's our problem nowadays.
That may be it.
Which is a whole nother brown bag presentation, right? Oh.
This is great, Tina. It inspired a lot of interesting conversation.
And hopefully another poem, Deidre.
I actually did just write up something for the Museum of Sexist Objects about my late husband and the diapering stuff for one of their exhibits. So Tracy had encouraged me because she had heard me tell those stories, and she said, I want you to write something up about that.
That's awesome.
We'll look forward to reading that.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Tina. It was a great presentation and nice, lively discussion. And I hope you'll join us again next week when we will be talking, I can't remember what the title is next week. Sorry. But it's
it's Melissa DeRosia.
Yeah,
Women's
and I
Change
can't
Roles.
remember the title though.
The intersection of sex,
okay,
race, and
so-
class.
There we go.
It's on the
Okay.
chat.
So I hope you'll join us again. I'm so glad that this week our connection went a little bit smoother and everybody got in. So
Good
it's
job,
great.
Denise.
Thanks again, Tina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.